Frances Perkins fight for labor laws. She watched 146 women burn to death because factory owners locked the exits. 12 years later, she became the most powerful woman in America. As a girl, Frances Perkins couldn't understand why good people lived in poverty. Her father said the poor were lazy or weak. Frances, even then, knew that couldn't be true. At Mount Holyoke College, she studied physics. Safe, respectable, appropriate for a young woman. Then came a class trip that changed everything. Her professor took students to tour factories along the Connecticut River. Frances saw exhausted girls younger than herself bent over machines in rooms with no windows, no ventilation, no exits, 12-hour shifts, 6-day weeks, fingers lost to machinery, lungs destroyed by cotton dust. She realized knowledge meant nothing if it didn't help people live with dignity. She abandoned the safe path, marriage to a suitable man, teaching piano to rich children. Instead, she earned a master's degree at Columbia University in economics and sociology, writing her thesis on malnutrition in Hell's Kitchen. Her family was horrified. Nice girls didn't study poverty. They certainly didn't live in settlement houses with immigrants. Frances didn't care what nice girls did. By 1910, she was executive secretary of the New York Consumers League, investigating factories, documenting violations, pushing for reform, clean bakeries, safe exits, maximum working hours. She testified before legislative committees, a young woman in a tailored suit telling powerful men their factories were killing people. They hated her. She didn't stop. Then came March 25, 1911. Frances was having tea with friends in Washington Square when she heard the fire bells. She followed the smoke to the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. 10 stories of flame and screaming. She stood on the street and watched young women jump from 9th-floor windows because the factory owners had locked the doors to prevent theft and unauthorized breaks. Their bodies hit the pavement like thunder. Again and again and again 146 workers died. Most were immigrant women and girls, some as young as 14. They'd been making shirtwaists, the fashionable blouses wealthy women wore to demonstrate their modernity and independence. Frances watched them burn so rich women could look progressive. She made herself a promise that day. Their deaths will not be in vain. Within weeks, Frances was appointed to the committee investigating the fire. She didn't just write a report. She rewrote New York's labor laws from the ground up. Fire exits, unlocked, accessible, clearly marked, maximum occupancy limits, sprinkler systems, regular safety inspections, 54-hour maximum work week, 1 day off per week. The factory owners fought every provision. They called it government overreach. They said it would destroy business. They said workers were trying to get something for nothing. Frances responded with photographs of the Triangle dead, with testimony from survivors, with cold economic data showing that safe workplaces were more productive, not less. New York passed the laws. Other states followed. Within a decade, American workplaces had been transformed, not completely, not perfectly, but irreversibly. And Frances Perkins became the most hated woman in industrial America. Business groups called her a communist. Newspapers mocked her as an old maid meddling in men's affairs. She'd married late, to an economist who suffered from mental illness, a fact she kept private to protect him from institutionalization. She absorbed the hatred and kept working. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt, newly elected president facing the Great Depression, asked Frances to join his cabinet as Secretary of Labor. She was 53 years old. No woman had ever served in a presidential cabinet. The idea was considered radical, possibly unconstitutional, definitely improper. Frances said she'd do it, but only on her terms. She handed Roosevelt a list of demands: a 40-hour workweek, a minimum wage, abolition of child labor, unemployment insurance, old age pensions. Roosevelt looked at the list. "You know this is impossible. Then find someone else," Frances said. Roosevelt appointed her anyway. For 12 years, longer than any other labor secretary in history, Frances Perkins fought for those impossible demands, and she won most of them. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, 40-hour workweek, minimum wage, child labor restrictions, the Social Security Act of 1935, old age pensions, unemployment insurance, support for dependent children. The laws weren't perfect. They excluded agricultural and domestic workers, a compromise Frances hated but accepted to get anything passed. Those exclusions meant most black workers weren't covered, a racial injustice that wouldn't be corrected for decades. But millions of workers, mostly white, yes, but millions nonetheless, gained protections that had never existed before. Frances was never satisfied. She wanted more. She fought for universal health care, failed. She fought for broader coverage, partially succeeded. She fought against every senator and congressman who tried to water down protections. They called her pushy, difficult, unwomanly. She wore the same black dress and tricorn hat to every public appearance, a uniform that said, "I'm not here to be decorative. I'm here to work." When Roosevelt died in 1945, Frances resigned. She'd been in the cabinet for 12 years, the longest-serving labor secretary in American history, male or female. She could have retired wealthy and celebrated. Instead, she taught labor history at Cornell, writing and lecturing until her death in 1965 at age 85. Most people don't remember her name, but every time you get paid overtime, that's Frances Perkins. Every time a workplace has a clearly marked fire exit, that's Frances Perkins. Every time someone collects Social Security or unemployment insurance, that's Frances Perkins. Every weekend you have off, that's Frances Perkins. She stood on a street in 1911 and watched 146 women die because profit mattered more than human life. And she spent the next 50 years making sure that would never be true again. At least not legally, not without consequence, not without someone powerful enough to fight back. She didn't just witness injustice. She built the architecture that made justice possible. Her father said the poor were lazy or weak. Frances proved that poverty was a policy choice, and policy could be changed. She was the first woman in a presidential cabinet, but that's not why she mattered. She mattered because she looked at burning women and said never again, and then spent her life making that promise real. Most people don't know her name, but every person who's ever received a paycheck with overtime pay, every child who went to school instead of a factory, every elderly person who retired with dignity, they're living in the world Frances Perkins built. One fire, 146 deaths, 50 years of fighting, and a country that learned, slowly and incompletely but irreversibly, that workers are human beings who deserve to live.